Hey, it's Mr. Peterson. Welcome back. This screencast is going to be about energy and the business of cellular energy and chemical energy, and a molecule that we've kind of thrown about but really haven't explained very much. That's the molecule of ATP, adenosine triphosphate. All cells need chemical energy. These are plant cells, actually, diatoms that do photosynthesis, so they get energy from the sun. But that's just a transient, that's just a temporary thing that they eventually turn into chemical energy. The chemical energy is used by cells, and it's carried by a molecule called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. We'll get to that. Where's that energy located at? Located in the bonds. So here's the first molecule. This is a starch molecule. Every one of these lines, if you remember, represents a bond between carbon atoms. So there's lots and lots of bonds. And in this glucose molecule down below, which is one of these things kind of broken apart, that's one glucose molecule. Look at all those bonds that are potential sources of energy for any particular cell. This is the molecule of ATP. And it's composed of three things, and you can see those pretty easily. There's a molecule, adenosine, which is actually a nitrogen-carrying base. A ribose, if you remember that OSE, that's a sugar. And then three polyatomic ions, which are PO4 3 negative, which means this is just a group of atoms, 5 of them, phosphorus and 4 oxygens around it. There's 3 of those phosphate groups attached to this molecule of ATP. So ATP, 1, 2, 3, triphosphate. The molecule's pretty interesting. Here's the static part of the molecule. That's the adenosine and the ribose sugar. But over here, these are those phosphate groups. 1, 2, 3, triphosphate. And that's kind of where the action's at for this molecule. It has to do with these the phosphate group interactions between those things, and that's really where the energy is being stored. Those bonds, if you see, they're flexible, and notice that they're charged negatively. Now, if you can imagine, here's a magnet. Here's another magnet. Oh, they stick together when they're positive and negative, but when we put them like that, they repel each other. See if I can get that one. Oh, that's like that. It's like that. Now they repel each other. So look at that. That's just exactly as the animation shows. So there's actually a repulsive charge, and so ATP works by storing energy and keeping those molecules into these transients. These bonds don't last very long, and they're pretty flexible. And the bond energy that comes from our food is actually stored in these flexible bonds of ATP. So there's a repulsive charge, and the repulsive charge makes it kind of an interesting relationship when we want to energize chemical reactions, or we want things to happen like active transport or movement or whatever it happens to be. Organisms are endergonic systems. What is that? What endergonic? What does that mean? That means that they require energy. That energy is always going into them. Think about that. Energy is always going into us as we eat our food. Well, what do we use that energy for? Well, we use it for synthesizing things, so building things. So we build big biomolecules like carbohydrates and proteins, nucleic acids and lipids. We also use it for reproduction, so it's important for reproduction. Cellular and organismal. Movement, so you can see the cheetah at the bottom. There's a cute little orangutan down there. There's a baby and the mommy, and active transport, so moving things in and out of cells against concentration gradients, phagocytosis, penocytosis, those things are active transport. And then temperature regulation. Our body temperature is at 37 degrees Celsius. It's pretty constant. It has to do with we have to keep fuel in the furnace to keep our chemical reactions going. How ATP works is it transfers energy from the breakdown of foods' covalent bonds to cellular functions. So it's an energy coupler. When that phosphate group gets removed, it transfers energy to whatever chemical reaction it happens to be directed toward. And then ATP is converted into ADP, so we go from a triphosphate down to a diphosphate. And that phosphate group is really what's charging the chemical reactions. So here's the cycle. So here's a cycle. ATP and ADP exist in a constant cycle of reactions. We use thousands of ATPs every second to the point where you probably, depending on which source you choose, some places I've read that you might consume your entire mass of ATP in the course of a day, which is totally impossible, but it's recycled. So it's like a rechargeable battery. So how does it get recharged? Well, we add some energy through the breakdown of food molecules. So your frosted cardboard nodules, you break some chemical bonds and really capture that energy, and we take ADP, adenosine diphosphate, and we can turn it into ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Now we've captured that bond energy, and then we're going to use that to do some cellular work. So whether it's movement of an organism or movement of molecules or whatever it is in and out of cells, that ATP transfers the energy from the breakdown of the covalent bonds to cellular function. So ATP is really a coupling. So it hooks reactions together. It hooks them between energy requiring reactions and energy providing reactions. So here's the look at ATP. So here's the triphosphate thing. 1, 2, 3 triphosphates. The phosphate is removed. That goes to do cellular work, whatever that happens to be. That's going to provide energy to those cellular functions. And we're left with ADP, diphosphate. And then what are we going to do? Well, we're going to recharge it. We have to eat some more stuff in order to get that molecule recharged. Here's an animation. This big green blob is actually an enzyme. So here's our ATP molecule coming in with the triphosphates. It does something called a hydrolysis. What's that prefix hydro mean? Exactly, water. And we've seen lysis before, like in lysosomes or Lysol. When ATP is broken apart, it's called a hydrolysis because water's involved. So here's an enzyme, and this enzyme is going to, or whatever this chemical reaction is that's in front of you, it's going to undergo some type of change. So ATP comes in, notice a phosphate is left behind, a bond is broken, some energy is released, and what happened to the enzyme? What happened? It changed shape. That's right. So that's actually what ATP does. The negative charge of that phosphate group caused this protein, this big green monstrous protein, to change shape, and that does some chemical work. And now we're left with, again, ADP, and so there's 2 phosphates, so diphosphate, and here's that other phosphate. In order to recharge this molecule, we have to add some energy to it, and when energy is added to it, the energy gets stored again in that last bond. So again, those repulsive forces there of the phosphates, it's repulsive means pushing off, right? So like these are so it costs me some energy to hold those magnets in place because they want to push away. So ATP has these temporary transient bonds. And as I said, your cells recycle gobs and gobs. You've got about 100 150 grams of ATP in your body, and that is reused over and over and over again throughout the day. So it's used to drive chemical reactions and then recharged. So we break down carbon-based molecules to produce ATP. One glucose molecule, kind of interesting. One glucose molecule will give you about 36 ATP. I'm not going to say exactly because there are some other considerations that we'll talk about that as we go along. So it's kind of a transient. It's kind of a temporary thing. It's used. It's used. It's charged. It's used. It's charged over and over and over again. You're well aware that fats store the most chemical energy from a triglyceride, and so the triglycerides, if you remember, which I'm sure you probably do, triglycerides they have the glycerol and then the zigzaggy fatty acids that come off the end. We get about 146 ATP from a triglyceride, so that's about 5 times as much as you would from a carbohydrate. Proteins, we don't like to use those to make ATP. Those are the ones that are doing the work. Those are the ones that are really running the show. They are the machinery. So carbohydrates, you get about 4 calories per gram. Lipids, about 9 calories per milligram. I'm sorry, 4 calories per milligram. So it's the small calorie. And protein's about 4 calories per milligram. So we've talked about that lipids store lots and lots of energy. So what are the big ideas about ATP? ATP is the energy molecule of cells, plants, animals, bacteria, you name it. That's what they store energy as quickly. They coupler. ATP couples chemical reactions that require energy and chemical reactions that give off energy. ATP stores food bond energy temporarily. Those frosted cardboard nodules are quickly converted into ATP molecules and then used up, and then you have to recharge it again and again and again. ATP charges chemical reactions by giving up a phosphate group. So that phosphate group, that negative charge, that PO4 3 negative, is really what does the work there. Phosphate groups, when that is attached to another molecule, that causes a change in the shape in the molecule. That change in the shape of the molecule lowers the activation energy, and it allows the reaction to go with not as much energy as it normally would. Anyway, there's some photo animation, video credits. I'd like to thank all these people who've written books that I've read about and blah, 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 blah. So ATP, energy, cool stuff.